Right. So thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks for giving up your an hour. You won't be any more than an hour, I promise. We will finish before 8 o'clock, before or on 8 o'clock. So thanks for kind of spending an hour of your Thursday evening with me. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to see you all. We're going to talk about mindset tonight and where mindset fits with business and practice growth, because it's one of those areas that is very often overlooked, and we'll kind of get to how and why that is as we go through tonight's session. But I'll just kind of caveat tonight's session. The whole idea, the premise of this is to give you some thinking space. So hopefully you've all got, you know, a notepad or a notebook, and you've got an opportunity just to start to make some kind of notes for yourself as we go through tonight's session. But it really is about giving you some freedom to start to think about the way you operate and the way people in your business or your practice operate. And in particular, we'll look at how we develop, you know, the term growth mindset. We'll look at what that means. And then we'll look at the importance of mindset and psychology in high performance. We'll look at how you can start to cultivate and develop a growth mindset for yourself and start to think about that for your team, the team around you as well. And then we've got some simple coaching principles that are really useful in terms of how we think about positive psychology and managing ourselves as well. So that's the plan for tonight. I think many of you will know me, but I'll just a quick background. So my background is originally in dentistry, and then I went into kind of business development and sales positions. I did that for a number of years, and then I went into sales management, then into business management, and I was kind of inside and outside of dentistry. So dentistry, medical devices, IT services, and now I'm a business coach. And the whole idea of the work that we do with clients is that we help them go from, you know, what is sometimes a little bit irregular, inconsistent activities, perhaps feeling a little bit negative, to actually how do we get to a point where we feel kind of much more positive, more in control, have a higher engaged team, think about, you know, higher performance and results. And hopefully we'll start to see some of those themes as we talk about tonight's session. And I've written a couple of books along the way, so hopefully you've had the chance to check these out in the past. If you're outside of dentistry, then Inspire, Influence, Sell is a great book on sales and communication. If you're inside dentistry, Inspire, Consult, Sell is an equally good book on sales and communication with patients. And if you are into leadership, if you're thinking about how you lead your team more effectively, then Coaching Leaders was out this year, and the feedback on that has been really good. And the principles we'll talk about tonight are from, actually, they blend across all three of those different books. But I just want to, I don't know if you've ever heard the story about the two wolves. If you have, I'll tell you it again, and it'll remind you. If you haven't, it'll be an interesting story. There's this kind of folklore tale about an Indian elder, and he was talking to his grandchildren about the fact that there are two wolves that live inside each of us. And one of those wolves is kind of despair. Sometimes it's limitation, it might be anger, it might be aggression, it might be arrogance, and sometimes that can start to consume us. And then the other wolf is hope, is kind of charity, is growth, is positivity, kindness, empathy. And these two wolves are battling inside each one of us, kind of good and bad. And one of the grandchildren asks the elder, when he's kind of finished talking about it, he says, yeah, but grandfather, what I'm interested in is, you know, how do we know which wolf wins? And the grandfather or the elder says to his grandchildren, well, it's the one you feed. And, you know, it's all about mindset, right? It's whatever we continually focus on, whatever we feed within ourselves, and whatever our teams feed within themselves is what prevails. And sometimes as leaders, a big part of what we do is start to help people change the way they think, change, you know, the wolf they're feeding in their own minds. It's really important for us to get it. And the reason this is important is when we start to think about high performance and the way in which our teams and we perform, there are three fundamentals. And the first fundamental we'll talk about a lot tonight is psychology. So it's the way we think. It's what we think we're capable of, what we think we're not capable of. It's the beliefs we have about ourselves with other people. It's the beliefs we have about the skills we can develop, about the contribution we can make. And very often the mindset and the psychology, if we don't get that right, then actually the other two layers I'm going to talk about now are completely undermined. And it's one of the things I've seen as a leader many times, working with different business teams, sales teams, clinical teams, where if you've got a member of the team that just, I don't know, it doesn't quite believe in themselves, or doesn't have that character, hasn't built the character, hasn't built the mindset, then it doesn't matter how much training and coaching and guidance you give them, until you and they can start to work on their self-belief and their confidence, then actually you'll find it gets undermined. All the other things that you try and do can be undermined. And I talk about the second layer. So we get the right psychology in place, then we start to build out skills and help them train people and get them to be able to do the right things. And then finally, we think about systemizing. Are we doing the right things in the right order? But everything is underpinned by the psychology. So the way we think, or the way our teams think, is very often the missing link. And we don't always take the time to have those conversations about it, to explore and go a bit deeper into some of the beliefs for us and our teams. And that could be the thing that makes the difference. And I've learned this the hard way a couple of times when managing team members, where I was trying to coach them, we trained them, we'd given them all of the support, all of the information, recognition. You kind of start to think, and you kind of think, where are we going wrong? And in almost every occasion, it comes back to psychology. It's that fundamental belief. Do they believe they can succeed? And if that is impaired, if that's undermined, it doesn't matter what else you do, it can really start to become almost a trap for them and for you if you're trying to help them get to the next level. So sometimes taking a step back with psychology can be really important. We'll talk about some of the ways to do that this evening. And I heard this analogy a few years ago. It really stuck with me, that the way we perceive the world, our beliefs and our mindset, is a bit like a fish being in water. Very often we don't even realize they are there. We don't realize these limitations exist. The fish doesn't know it lives in water. It doesn't realize what water is. And sometimes our mindset's the same. We don't know what's holding us back, and we don't realize those kind of unconscious beliefs that sit there. So I'm interested in your opinion this evening. I did say in the preamble to tonight, I'd love to have some interaction. So on the Zoom settings bar, you'll see there is a chat box. So you can click on the chat box. I'd love to hear from your perspective as you think about, either it might be teams you manage, it might be teams you work with, maybe some of the behaviors and attitudes that you see and experience that are most challenging, either for you or for people in your organization. I'd love to just a couple of thoughts from you. And while you're doing that, I'll kind of share some of my own experiences. I've had lots of experience where you meet resistance when you're trying to introduce change. And very often that resistance isn't because somebody's not capable of doing something, or because they can't do something. It's because they either have built up this belief around what they're doing right now and don't want to change, or they don't believe they're capable of it. But what you see is resistance. People don't tell you that. You meet it as resistance. So it's fascinating. And Dora, thank you, Dora. Dora says some team members say they just can't get better at something, but I can see they aren't trying. Yeah, that's really interesting. And that is thanks, Dora. That's a classic situation where somebody's almost trapped in their own beliefs. They kind of say they can't do something, and you're actually seeing that they don't make that much of an effort. And it's really fascinating. And we'll talk about some techniques tonight about how you can start to address that. Anjay, thank you. So they don't want to listen or change the way they work. Yeah, for some people, there's this, I think it's a bit like the experience I've had, Anjay, isn't it? It's that inherent resistance to what's happening. Inherent resistance. So, okay, thanks, Dora. Thanks, Anjay. Tracy, Misson, if you've got anything, then feel free to put that in the chat as well. I'll have a look at it. We'll try and think about these situations as we go through tonight's session, to kind of think, right, if there are lens that we can look at some of the principles through. And there's this whole principle between, you've probably heard, fixed mindset, growth mindset, and those two components. And the reason this is really interesting, because there's lots of research being done on the mind and the way we think. And one of the kind of principles is recognizing what do our minds, how do they work? What's it doing for us? And one of the things that the mind does, its job for us is to generate thoughts, right? Just generate thoughts over and over again. And what's fascinating is that when the research that's been done, mainly in the US, in the American Psychological Association, what they found was that on default, the thoughts that the mind produces, and it's like tens of thousands of thoughts a day, right? Tens of thousands. 50% of the time, those thoughts default to negative. So it's, oh God, this is happening. Do I have to do that? Or it's, if this happens, then worst case scenario is this. And it's almost catastrophizing before something actually happened. So there's this kind of rumination that happens in the mind that just continues around negativity without people even realizing it. So this is completely unconscious. This isn't directed. This is what happens on autopilot for most people. So 50% of the time, we think we go to negative thoughts. And it's interesting, there's also another piece of evidence that says once you start a chain of thoughts, 80% of the next kind of period of time within those thoughts, like maybe half an hour, 80% of the thoughts will follow the train of the original thought. So if you think something negative, it just cascades. And we can all relate to that, right? You have a negative thought, and then obviously, oh God, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And it's like a chain reaction. And that's how the mind works. It joins things up. But 20% of the time, people's thoughts are neutral. Okay, so they're not positive, they're not negative. They're kind of, what's for dinner tonight? Well, what's on the shopping list? That kind of thing, right? And then just 30% of the time, the mind will go to positive thoughts. So you can start to see that actually for most people, without any intention, this is where they spend, this is where the mind goes, where they spend their time. This is how, and you can imagine how that makes people feel, right? So it makes people feel, when you're having negative thoughts, it makes you feel resistant, make you feel defensive. And you start to see that in the behaviors, the actions, and the interactions and relationships that we have. So some of the things that are happening, some of the things you're experiencing are because of the way that person's thinking. So we have to, there are some things we can do, and we'll talk about it, but our mindset, your team's mindset, it affects your entire experience of the world, right? And it's interesting because when you're worrying about something, when something's on your mind or when something's on your team's mind, it's really easy to overlook everything else in your life that's going really well. All the relationships, all the the family, the friends, even the working environment, its stability, all of that stuff gets completely sideswiped, and they just focus on negativity. It's because it affects everything we do. It affects our entire experience. And if we have a negative mindset, we'll have a negative experience of the world. And if we have a positive mindset, we have a positive experience of the world. And for some people, that becomes easier than others, right? And I love this quote, a healthy attitude is contagious, but we don't have to wait to catch it from others. We can become a carrier, right? We can become a carrier of a positive attitude and a positive mindset. And we'll look at how we can do that. So I've got a poll which I'd like to ask you, just because I like a bit of interaction. Thinking about your mindset, and if you think about a scale of 1 to 10, on a scale of 1 to 10 in the average, say, week, what would you say is your kind of mindset score? If 1 was negative, 10 was positive, where, for you personally, where would you say you are on a scale of 1 to 10? You'll notice on this scale, I've only put from 5 to 10 because I was hoping that no one's lower than a 5. But just click on the number that most represents where you are kind of most of the time during an average week. And I appreciate we get ups and downs and there's all that stuff goes on. But just let me know, just click on one that best represents your position. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, and we've got some positive people on the line tonight. That's good. So excellent. Okay, good. So let me show you what you said. So we've got 50% at 8, and then a split 25% at 7 and 9. So we've got 7, 8, and 9. So I'm really kind of preaching to the choir this evening. It's good. But what I'll do is hopefully give you some ideas around what you can start to do to manage yourselves even more effectively, because maybe you get to the next notch up, or even a couple of notches up. If you were at 7, maybe get to a 9. If you're 8, maybe get to a 9 or a 10. If you want to do this stuff, right? But there are some things we can do, positive psychology principles that we can follow that help us to start to cultivate our own positivity and growth mindset. And the first thing we can do, and this, when you hear this, you kind of think, okay, that's obvious, but we don't often do it. The first is awareness, right? Awareness is the first step to change for any of us. So the first thing we do is to start to notice, actually, when we go default, when our mind goes to default thinking, how often is that going to positive or negative? And start to notice, am I automatically thinking, God, this is a negative situation? I'm thinking negatively about this situation. Or do I go to positive? And you'll start, when just becoming aware actually makes you just kind of more sensitive to it, and creates an opportunity for you to then to start to be able to shape it and change it, right? But without awareness, the first step, we tend to be on default. So this is about waking you up, kind of thinking, actually, let's become present about what's going on for my own mindset. And then second, once you become aware, start to think about directing your focus and the thoughts. So when I learned this years ago, I did an NLP practitioners program. NLP stands for neuro-linguistic programming, how you start to direct and focus the mind and how that affects the body and your interactions and behaviors. And it was fascinating that, there's a lot of body of work that shows that when we become aware of our thoughts and we start to focus and direct them, we can actually change the way we think. And that changing the way we think has material impact on brain structure, neuroplasticity, and of course, our own sense of positivity and well-being, just because we start to direct our focus and our thoughts. So the question to ask when you become more aware, perhaps if you're going to negativity, is to think, okay, well, what do I want to focus on instead? Or how do I want to feel about this situation instead? It's a really valuable switch. It's like straight away, wherever you go to by default, how do I want to feel instead is a really nice default question, because it changes the impact of your thinking straight away. So notice where you are first, start to redirect your focus second. And then third, there's this principle in psychology called the inner voice. And the inner voice is this voice we all have in our head, it's almost like this continuous commentary about stuff that's going on. And sometimes it'll be singing a song, sometimes it'll just be asking you questions, sometimes it might be criticizing you. And it's interesting because in psychology, the name for the inner voice is actually the inner critic. It's called the inner critic, which is fascinating. So for most people, it's because 50% of the time it defaults to negative. So actually what we want to start to do really is train ourselves from going from critic to coach. So training that voice, becoming aware of that voice, and starting to move it from overly critical to starting to self-coach and move it in the direction that we would like our mindset to go. So we start to move the voice from critic to coach. And then fifth is about, so once you're on this trajectory, we start to move our thinking and our kind of internal monologue towards more greater positivity, then we have to start to think about setting up ways to remember to do it, because the mind will go back to default very easily. So we just start to set up positive triggers to keep your mindset positive and growing. And one of the things, when I first learned about this in, the mid 2000s, probably 2004, 2005, and what I did, because I noticed I had some default thinking patterns I wanted to change, I just set up reminders to myself. So I had post-it notes kind of on my desk, I had them in my car, I had them on the fridge at home, and I used to set alarms on a phone just to remind me to kind of mind my thinking, just to remind me to be positive, to not allow that automatic default thinking to take over and just proliferate. It's really, really easy to do. So it's really useful if you can start to manage your own thinking and your thoughts. Then you can be a much more positive influence on people around you as well, of course. And there's this whole principle about developing an inner coach, and really that's about shaping the questions that you ask yourself on a regular basis. So you can start to ask yourself better questions, especially when you hit difficult situations, like with your team members, like if the business isn't exactly where you want it to be, like if, we all deal with customers, patients, if you're having difficult interactions, actually starting to ask yourself better questions in those moments really helps. Things like, how is this here to help me? How's this situation here to help? What do I need to learn from this conversation or this situation with this person? How do I use this as an opportunity? How do I grow from here so that next time it's easier? What will I change next time? So you start to ask questions that just are positively framed, so that for you when you're managing yourself, instead of asking critical questions, you ask coaching questions that have this positive impact on yourself, and you start to move yourself forward. So it's a really useful way to do it. And I'll send you slides from this evening, so you'll have these slides as a kind of as options going forward. So I'd love to hear just a kind of, we're at the 7:25 mark. I'd love to hear, when you think about this so far, what are you thinking? What are your key actions so far? Just in the chat, love to hear what you're kind of thinking. Okay, this is about managing you. We're going to talk about your team members next. But for now, I'd love to hear what you, maybe what some of your actions are. For me, it's a constant process of awareness. So I'll have periods of time where either workload's high or there's particularly demanding situations I'm going into, and I'll have to revisit some of these principles for myself on a regular basis. I've been trying to practice this stuff. I'm going to take the word out, trying. I've been practicing this stuff for probably, coming up to 15, 16, maybe even longer, actually, maybe 18 years. But it's just this continual process that we go through. Dora, thank you. Yeah, inner voice needs coaching to turn things positive. Yeah, I think we can all relate to that, Dora. And it's great that you have kind of recognized that this evening, because you can start to work on it now and recognize that that inner voice is yours. You can control it. You can start to shape it, change it, and improve it. And it's, I remember when I first learned that principle, I'm like, really? And you almost have this internal conversation. What, I can change it? Yeah, I can change it. And it sounds a bit strange to be talking to yourself about it, but that awareness is the first step and first opportunity to change. Thanks, Dora. That's great. Miss On, be easier on myself and keep thinking positive. Yeah, thanks, Miss On. Yeah, I love that. Be easier on yourself. Be a bit more forgiving. Be a bit more forgiving. Don't be so demanding. Doesn't mean you can't still, think about, the goals that you want to set, make progress, do things that take you forward, but actually doing it in a way where you're a bit easier on yourself, a bit more forgiving about your situation is really valuable, because we're only here once, and there's something about just enjoying the present moment and not stealing that sense of joy from your life, right? It's getting quite deep this evening, isn't it? Anjay, thanks. Have a positive mindset in all situations. Yeah, recognize that you can do that. Yeah, recognize that you can choose your mindset in all situations. Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Great. I love those takeaways. Thank you. That's brilliant. So that was us, right? That's us individually. We've also, for a lot of us, we've either got teams, or we're working in teams, or we've got people around us that we're working with on a regular basis. So I'd love to hear, when you think about your team, the team that you're working with, let me launch this poll so that you can actually do something with it. So let's go polls and your team's mindset poll. So when you think, this is a similar question to before, but we're thinking now about your team's mindset. So you gave a score for yourself. There's a team that you're working either with or they're working with you. During an average week, what would you say your team's mindset score is? You'll notice I've added a 4 here, so you've got a scale of 4 to 10. It is actually 1 to 10, but I didn't really think you'd have anyone lower than a 4. So between 4 and 10, what's your team's mindset score during an average week? It'd be interesting to see the difference here between yours and your teams. And certainly the teams I've worked with in the past, especially when you are, if you're leading a team, you almost feel obliged to be more positive. You are the one that is kind of setting the standard, if you like. Looks like there's 2 questions there. Don't worry about the second question. I don't know what that is. just go with that first question, your team's mindset. Don't worry about, oh, thanks, Dora. Yeah, don't worry about part 2. Oh, it doesn't let me choose any without answering. Oh, in that case, sorry, I didn't realize that. In that case, the second question, just choose, it doesn't matter which one you choose a number for the first one and then a choice for the second one. Okay, good. Thank you. I think, oh, that's interesting. Wow. So in the first, so for our first mindset poll, we had 7s, 8s, and 9s, right? So half of you were 8, 25% were 7s, 25% were 9. For your team's mindset, this is interesting. 80% are at 6. So that's interesting. 80% are at 6 and 20% of you are at 4. So 6 and 4. So it's quite a difference. You see, it's quite a difference between your mindset and your team's mindset. So that is really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. And obviously, this is just amongst our group this evening. So how do we help our team to do the same? So if we think about, our position as leaders is about role modeling, right? So a lot of the time, we have to project that positivity for people to pick up on it. And if you think about the way relationships work and the way that our interactions work with people, the more positive a culture and environment we can create, the more likely we are for people to pick that up. As we talked about that contagious piece, we can be contagious. Don't wait to catch it, be the carrier, right? So a bit like our own thoughts, we have to then start to think about our team's behaviors and comments. When are they kind of positive? When are they negative? And start to become aware, start to notice. And once we've noticed, our team's comments, positive and negative, we have to then make a conscious effort to reinforce positive comments, positive contributions, positive behaviors, right? Reinforce it, praise it. And then we have to positively challenge any negativity. It's really important that we do both, right? That we reinforce positive behaviors and then we positively challenge negative behaviors. And that's how we start to shift the culture and shift the way that people think and feel and act in the work, in our businesses and practices. And then that's kind of tactical work that we do. Then we start to think about actually what is the direction of travel? What's the culture we want to create? So we start to discuss and talk about what positive attitudes and behaviors look like. So it might be your team meetings, it might be during one-to-ones with each of your team, but we have to focus on what is it we want people to do, how do we want them to behave, think, and act, and then we have to talk about that so that they get it, so that they start to see it. And then of course we have to act that way ourselves. Can't say, well, I want you to be positive, but I'm going to be in a bad mood on a Monday morning when I come in because I've had a really bad journey to work or whatever. You have to role model it. So we have to role model it, and then we have to start to discuss what is it we want? What does positive behavior look like? What do positive attitudes look like? And just keep a rhythm around this, keep bringing it back to the surface for people so they're reminded and they can start to be clear about the direction that we want them to go in. And then we start to think about, there's a practice I've worked in, and it's interesting, on the inside of their kind of team room, they've got like a staff room, their team room, on the inside of the door, they've got this sign that says, you're going out to face your patients, put a smile on your face and have a positive attitude all day. And it's really interesting. It's like it becomes a trigger. So everyone that comes into work in the morning, they'll go into the staff room or the team room. They do what they do, get themselves set up, maybe make a cup of tea, get ready. And as they walk out, the last thing they see before they step across that threshold to go and be on the team in the practice is this sign that says, put a smile on your face, have a positive attitude, have a great day. Because it's so important to remind people that that's what we need to do. And it sounds so obvious, but for some people, without that reminder, they slip into the default 50% negative thinking without even realizing. So there are things we can do that create visual reminders to keep our teams positive, to keep growth established. And it may be that you start to think about posters, some nicer pictures in the practice or in your business that just remind people to keep a positive attitude, it might be mission statements, but actually those visual reminders make a real impact. There's so much evidence to show they make a really positive impact for people and their behaviors. And then finally, there's this default in all of us that notices the bad behaviors, right? It notices when people are negative. It notices when people are not performing or don't give 100%. But actually, we as leaders need to start to retune ourselves, to start to seek out and proactively praise positive things that we see. So go on the hunt for the great things your people are doing, even the small things, and praise them. The more you can reinforce that, the more you notice it, the more you bring it to the fore, the more it happens. What gets focused on gets repeated. And that sounds like an obvious thing, but it's so often overlooked. We take all that good stuff that happens and just, yeah, well, that's expected of you. We don't praise it, and we only focus in on the things that start to erode or wear us down. So that's something you can do that really does help foster the right culture and environment within your teams. So some hopefully some practical things there that help you to think about, how do I start to change and shift the dynamic with my team? And then as we thought about self-coaching, we can also start to think about developing coaching skills in conversations with our teams. And we said we will answer the questions that we ask ourselves. Our team will naturally answer the questions we ask them. So we have to start to ask better questions of ourselves and of our team. So some examples of better questions, if someone comes to us and with a problem or an issue, just rather than kind of thinking it's negative, just asking that question, how else could you look at this? How else could you be looking at this situation? You might say, okay, so what could you be learning from this? And you notice instead of will, it's could. So we really want to encourage people to start, okay, if you could, what could you learn from this? How could this be an opportunity for us, for you? How could you grow from this situation, from this interactions? Because very often these situations that cause negativity are people situations. They're with patients, with customers, or with other team members. It's normally people based. What could you change next time? And for all these questions, you sometimes, even especially when you start these conversations, if your team aren't used to it, if you're not used to it, you might meet some resistance. So you might meet I don't, if you say, well, how else could you look at this? And they say, I don't know, right? In those situations, our job is to press on. So to say, okay, well, I get that you don't know, but think a little harder. If you did know, how else could you look at this? So don't take no for an answer. Don't take resistance at face value. Push through it. We have to keep asking questions. We have to press on in these situations. When especially want to make a culture shift in our organization, it's really, really important that we use these skills that we develop to press through. So we've got a couple of things. We've kind of looked at us managing our mindset. We've got our teams and our mindset. So thinking about your team's mindset. I'd love to hear what you've thought about that. What are you thinking you might need to change or act on from your team's perspective? We've got mindset and we've got kind of questioning and coaching. And I've had multiple experiences, led lots of teams. And it's really interesting. The big shift I noticed when I made the shift. When I made the shift, and I was much more intentional about the way that I coached and praised and asked positively framed questions, everything shifted. So it started with me. I was able to make that big change in the team. So Dora, thank you. Yes, seek out the positive to praise. Yeah, just start to look actively for the positive things that you can praise, and it'd be interesting to notice what happens, Dora, when you start to do this. I'm going to be catching up with you, Dora, and hearing. So seeking out the positive to praise. Yeah, thank you, Dora. What else have we got? Yeah, and this doesn't have to just be with your teams. It can be with people you work alongside. It can be. And some of this you might be thinking actually on a personal level as well, with people that you're close to that you might need to kind of help and support and coach. I mean, it's interesting. I've got I'm not going to totally expose it, but I've got a couple of family members that are in my life that naturally are just more negative, and I find myself intentionally in conversations with them just asking positively framed questions, because and I notice the difference if they're in a conversation with somebody that kind of lets them keep spilling out negativity, that negative train just carries on, right? But as soon as it's interrupted and I ask questions that just challenge the negative assumption, move them to a positive outlook, it's amazing how that shifts. It can shift their mood, it can shift their outlook, their positivity. It's amazing. So I'll encourage you to try this, especially with those people that you might have some of the more challenging relationships with. Anjay, thank you. Always asking the why, when, what, and how questions to team members. Yeah, thank you. And doing it with a kind of positive frame, right? So positively framed questions. Yeah, thanks, Anjay. That's great. There's this worksheet which I will also send you out as a follow-up from tonight's session. So I'll send you the slides from this evening's session. I'll send you this mindset worksheet, and it's a really simple and useful little tool. It just gets your team. It's really good for your teams as well to start to think about motivation. And there's a couple of questions in here that are really useful that positively frame the work you're doing. What do I love most about my role? Why is it vital that I'm successful? There are a couple of questions. If you've not asked your team that, they're useful questions to ask because they get people thinking about their own personal intrinsic motivation. Then start to think about what's happening, where yours and your team's mindset might go on default. So what do you need to become more aware of? What are the situations that might trigger some default negative thinking? What can you do to manage yourself? What changes will you make? Then this whole piece around moving from inner critic to inner coach for yourself and your team. So the questions we've covered this evening. And then some questions about, okay, how do I make this stick? Because change, setting up the environment to help you change could be really useful. So anyway, it's a workbook that just single page. You can kind of capture some thoughts on it and then just keep it somewhere where it's present for you so that it becomes something that starts to help you focus in and take some action that moves and changes the direction for you and for your teams. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of models. We do there's a couple of models we use for communication and selling, which I think I've shared with you before. They're both in the books, Inspire, Influence, Sell and Inspire, Consult, Sell. These really help with that kind of engagement of customers, patients, and team members, thinking about the structure by which we communicate and develop relationships. So they're in the books. They're also a part of the work that we do, but I wanted to share that with you. The other work that we do, there's the latest book I published this year, which was called Coaching Leaders. If you're particularly interested in coaching, that book's really useful because it's got this coaching model that we use that's way beyond just a coaching conversation. It starts to think about how, as a leader in your business, coaching your teams, moving the whole culture into a culture of coaching. It's a really useful model to be able to help you set that up and work through a structured process. So sales conversations, better consultative sales conversations, much more coaching-led conversations and leadership with your team. They're two really nice models that have worked well for us. And they're in the books, they're in the programs we run. And then for you and for your team, just always remember that enthusiasm, tonight you've probably had some good insights. We've got some good actions. So thank you for participating in that. Remember that for all of us, enthusiasm has a half-life. If we don't act on this stuff early, if we don't act now, if we don't act straight away, you won't do it. Your enthusiasm wanes, and so does your teams, right? So that move from negative to positive, we have to make sure that we help our teams to maintain it, because they might be, you can do a course correction conversation, you can start to introduce it in your one-to-ones and team meetings, but you will need to continually reinforce and encourage people, because that enthusiasm to change doesn't last forever. So just as a reminder, it's a reminder to me as well, right? It's a reminder to all of us that enthusiasm has a half-life. If you've enjoyed this evening's session, I'd love to hear a couple of things. So we're 45 minutes in. We'll finish a bit early tonight, hopefully. I'd love to hear in the chat box. First question: would you say tonight your 45 minutes has been a useful 45 minutes of your time? Just if you think it has, put a Y in the chat box. Brilliant. Thank you, Dora. Thank you. Lovely. That's good. Thank you, Tracy. Brilliant. Thank you. And then more importantly, thanks, Angie. Have you got something specific that you're going to work on tomorrow? I want you to think about your kind of commitment to yourself. Just a moment. Like, what have you got something specific that you're going to work on? Again, just put a yes in if you've got it. If you want to put what it is in there, brilliant. But don't feel obliged, because this is the bit where it moves from theory to action, and it's my favorite part, because that's what makes the difference, right? That's what's going to make the difference for you and for your practice, your business. So just a moment to capture that. I'm going to give you a moment to tap that away. Thanks, Anjay. So yes, when I have a team meeting with a staff member, we'll be using the how could, what could questions. Brilliant. Thanks, Anjay. That's great. Good. And I'll let Tracy, Miss On, and Dora, if you could, just let me know one thing, just kind of one thing that you're going to use from this evening. Thank you. And while you're typing those up, if anybody is interested in thinking about where this fits specifically for your business, then Tracy, thank you. So Tracy said, yes, give more praise, and similar to Anjay, do that how could and what could questions, positively frame the questions, change the direction of travel. Thanks, Tracy, that's great. And Dora, yes, look for the positives in people's actions. Yeah, great. Got some really good actions from this evening. Thank you, everybody. That's super. And the thing is, you're going to make a real difference to your teams through this change in your own behaviour. You will have this ripple effect onto your teams. That's brilliant to hear. Thank you. Miss On, says yes, work on my mindset to keep positive and help my teammates to do the same. Brilliant. Thank you, Miss On. That's super. And it's so simple, isn't it? Just sometimes you just need that awareness. You just need the recognition that I can actually do something here, and you all can. So thank you. So if anybody would like, if you think about your business, your practice, if what we've done tonight has been useful, and you think actually that's been something I can take away. If you are interested in a specific, let me just share that with you. I'll put this back over here. If you're interested in a specific strategy session to think about your business, your practice, and actually there might be some things beyond just this mindset stuff that is useful for you, I just put in the chat a link to a complimentary on me 45-minute strategy session where you can look specifically at your practice or your business. I'm just going to load that up, make sure it works. Yeah, that's good. So I think I'm still sharing my screen, so you can see. I won't have anything this week because I'm out all day tomorrow at a customer event. But yeah, so Tuesday next week, I've got there's probably there are a couple of slots really. Wednesday, a bit more flexibility. Wednesday, that's good. Thursday, better check that diary is working because I've definitely got some stuff in those days. But if you want to, if you are interested, I've put the link in the chat. Feel free to click on it, and then you'll open up that same page so you can see it. And what we do is a kind of three-part strategy session. So part one is, where are you now in your business and your practice? And then where would you like to get to, whether that's, might be 12 months out, might be a bit longer range. Part two is thinking, okay, so what changes, what development do you need to make to yourself and your business or your practice to get there? And then part three is, if there's a way we can help, great. But otherwise, if you've got what you need from those part one and part two, you're good to go. So that's an option. If you are interested, if you'd like to take me up on that, booking links there. Just click it. Just check that link works for you, and that you can see it. And I'd love to, just love to hear, because that will also give us a chance to think about what have you covered tonight. How are you implementing it? How's that working for you? So if you'd like to do that, I would be delighted to see you on one of those calls. So that is the content for this evening. I'd like to open it up to questions now. So have you got questions that it can be related to tonight's session, or it can be something different? I'm always up for a challenge. If there's something else you want to ask me, if you want to put me on the spot, I'm happy for you to do that. You can either do it in the chat, or you can come off mute and just ask. So entirely up to you. Who'd like to ask a question? You're on mute, by the way. If you are asking a question, you are on mute.
Yeah, I feel it was very beneficial, Justin, just to see, the how could, the what could, etc. You get into the sort of zone, and your mind sort of shifts, not to negative, but you get into habits. So having this session was very useful to get aligned again into that positive frame of mind, and also asking those questions. Like I said, I've got a difficult team member, so this will be good with tomorrow's Zoom meeting with her. So
very good.
It's going to be asking in a very different way than previously. So that was very useful. Thank you.
Ah, good. Thanks, Anjay. And I've known you for a little while now, Anjay. I know you're a pretty positive guy.
Yeah.
But as you say, it's managing those team situations where and actually, I think we're very similar. One of the big struggles I had when I was managing teams was like, why don't they just think more positively? And it can be really frustrating.
Yeah.
So actually finding a way to manage those conversations, manage those situations through coaching questions that just get people to move in their own thinking to positive. And it does take a bit of developing. It's not, you'll do it a couple of times, you think, right, we've got it, and then the behavior slips back in. So you just have to keep nurturing and cultivating people.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, pleasure. And it's interesting. I get lots of questions about kind of different types of challenging team members, particularly negative people. How do you handle those different types of characters? And there's a number of ways to do it, some of which we've talked about tonight. But one of the things that I've found really valuable actually is kind of almost helping that person to shine a light on the problem, because very often negative people. I remember I had in one of the businesses I ran, it's probably 6 or 7 years ago now. I had quite a big team, and I had this one person who didn't report to me, reported to one of my management team. And it was a lady, and she had no idea, but she was like, you heard the term mood hoover. So she was a proper mood hoover, just negative about everything. Everything was a problem. For every solution, she had a problem.
It's very draining, isn't it?
Yeah.
Drains a lot of it. Yeah.
It was just completely default behavior. But if you asked her, and I did some coaching with the manager that was managing her. If you asked her, she saw herself as a positive person. So there was a complete blind spot, complete mismatch between how everyone else saw her and how she saw herself. And sometimes the way to address that is to have that. You have to have quite an honest conversation with somebody. I'm a big fan of asking permission to give someone some feedback. So in a one-to-one, would you mind? Would it be okay if I give you some feedback? And then when most people will say yes. And then the key is to really talk about the behavior. So it's not about the person, it's about the behavior. This is the behavior I see. And then talk about the impact of that behavior. And then talk about the outcome of that. So it's like, they call it bio, the behavior, the impact, and the outcome, and then how it makes people feel. And that's a really effective way to get people to almost, move from unaware to aware. And from there, then we can ask our coaching questions. Okay, so what could you do to change it? And all of a sudden we're away. So that's a really useful kind of structure in terms of being able to handle those, because negative, challenging people are difficult for us to manage. So actually having a structure that enables us to do it is really useful. So
perfect. Thank you.
Hope that's useful. Very good. Nissan says thank you. It was such a brilliant session. Thank you, Nissan. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Anjay, thank you for joining us. Dora, thank you for joining us. Tracy, thank you for joining us this evening. if nobody has any other questions, I'm going to give you 5 minutes of your evening back. So you might get like half a glass of wine in or something, or half a beer or something. Who knows?
Half a water, half a water.
Oh, good for you, Andrew. Well, yeah, me too.
It's gin. It's gin.
Is it? Oh God, mine genuinely is water.
It's not gin. It's water.
Mine genuinely is water, but I'm probably am going to have a glass of wine. I think it's the Thursday's the new Friday, right? So I probably am going to have a glass of wine. But yeah, who knows? Bill, thank you for joining us. Anjay, Tracy, Miss On, thank you all so much. I'll send you the link to this recording. So if you want to go back over it, or if there's anybody in your team that you want to share this with, then feel free to let them, access the recording. And I'll give you the slides and the mindset work sheet as well. And there'll be, if anybody wants to kind of schedule that one-to-one strategy session, feel free to jump in my diary. I'd love to have a conversation with you and follow up from this evening.
Brilliant. Thanks,
Right.
Justin.
Pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a great rest of the evening. Take care. See you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. See you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.